Rick Steves is a popular public television host, a best-selling guidebook author, and an outspoken activist who encourages Americans to broaden their perspectives to travel. He is the founder and owner of Rick Steves Europe, a travel business with a small group tour program that brings more than 30,000 people to Europe annually. Rick lives and works in his hometown of Edmonds, Washington, where his office window overlooks his junior high school. Please welcome Rick Steves.
Whoa! Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah. I love town hall.
We love you!
I've just been going on a 10-city and 10-day book tour all over the United States, and I'm really glad this is my last stop on this little trip. It's so nice to see you here because I've got a story to tell about my newest book, which is actually my oldest book. And I didn't even know I had written it as a book until a couple years ago. On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu and the making of a travel writer. I mean, I knew the title was going to be On the Hippie Trail, but then we had to kind of debate what's the rest of it. I wanted everybody to know that it was from Istanbul to Kathmandu because that's exciting. And I also realized it was the making of a travel writer. So what I want to do today, or this evening, is to kind of analyze how this little crazy trip I took before I was a travel teacher sort of provided a compost pile for me to grow out of. I didn't even realize it until I rediscovered this journal 40 years after I wrote it. But I wrote this book when I was a piano teacher, and I thought I'd be a piano teacher all my life. This was an experience that changed my life a little bit. And what I'm going to do is take about the first half and do the route and the actual trip. Then we'll take a very short break. And then the last part, we'll be just kind of looking at how did that impact my passion for teaching travel since? And what were the lessons and the takeaways from this trip? It is kind of exciting for me as a travel writer, or a book writer, an author. This is the book you've got, and it's a collector's item now because that was just the first printing, and the new printing just came out about a week ago, and if you look at the very top, it has one extra line of text on it. Which I can't believe, because I'm a guidebook writer and we never get on the New York Times best-selling list. But my publisher said if you go around the country and you give a whole bunch of talks and everybody has to buy a book in order to take the talk, and we play our cards right, we can actually be right there just 2 slots behind Bill Gates, all right? So thank you for buying the book, and it's very odd for me to teach a class or give a talk where everybody has already bought the book, so I can just relax now and tell you stories, okay? But it's as I said, I was a piano teacher. The kids wouldn't practice in the summer, so I thought, I'm not going to struggle with that. I'm going to Europe. I'll see you in September. But honestly, I just wanted to be a piano teacher all my life. I was so happy about that. My girlfriend was a piano teacher. We were going to move our grand pianos together, you know. They could just, grand pianos have that cool way of snuggling. And we could travel in the summer. It was going to be great. But I traveled a lot in the summer, and I was learning about travel. And I was it was my thing. Every summer I'd go to Europe. I have a good buddy up in Edmonds, Gene Openshaw. If you know my books, you probably know Gene. The day after we graduated from high school in '73, we were teenagers, and we just went to Europe. And we had a Eurail pass and did the typical, whirlwind tour of Europe. This was before I understood the importance of packing light. I bought the biggest backpack external frame that you could buy, and I remember laying awake at night thinking, I've got this capacity, what can I put in it? I wanted to fill that baby, and then I wanted to carry it around Europe. And it was crazy what we packed, but that was just learning how to travel. And the one thing that I did just crazy, right from the very first trip, was write journals. I don't know why, the journals were just for me, but I was diligent about writing journals. I think it was some notion that all of these great experiences, I think of them like butterflies. They just flutter by, and you can net them. A lot of people net butterflies and pin them to a board, you know. And I wanted to net those wonderful moments because I was aware, even as a teenager, that they would flutter right out of my life, and they'd be gone. And I just thought, that's sad. I wanted to save them somehow. And I knew if I wrote them down, it would let me enjoy them for a long time to come. And it was actually, the mechanics of writing it down was just, for me, delightful. It helped me wrestle with ideas and descriptions and so on. So every summer, I would buy what we called an empty book. And come to think of it, it's just like the book that you all have tonight, without any words on it. It was hardcover, and it had 200 pages, and I would fill that thing up on my 10 weeks in Europe that I did every summer. So I have 7 of those books, each 200 pages, and I would just, even on my very first trip, when I wasn't that thoughtful about the journal, when we did our graduation from high school trip, this is the last page of that journal, and I was just diligently taking notes and keeping track of names and prices. If you look at this, is all the accommodations we had in 70 nights, and if you look closer at it, you can see 70 nights in Europe, average 84 cents per night per person. 84 cents per night. We spent $114 for the both of us over 70 days. You couldn't get one single room in Europe for much less than that. So it's more expensive to travel now, that's for sure. But this is weird that an 18-year-old would do this kind of stuff when they're having their fun in Europe. On the flight home, Gina and I would spend most of the flight making this frieze, and we called it a frieze, and it was designed with a train, and it was all the memorable moments from our trip. You know, from sleeping out on the dikes in Holland, to getting kicked out of the casino in Monte Carlo, to going to the concentration camp in Dachau, to what else? Getting exhausted in the Louvre. Oh man, to learning how to love souvlaki. I mean, that was just vivid. We were saving that. That was 1973. Well, 5 years later, we graduate from college, and I whisper into Gene's ear, "Go east, young man, go east." And I was looking for a partner. For a couple of times I had planned and booked a trip to the east, and then I canceled out of it because it was a little bit scary, to be honest. And I'd go back to Europe, where it was very easy for me. But 1978, we were ready to do it. And I wrote this book. And the journal, if you look at the journal, and by the way, you can all look at the actual scan of the journal. On the very end of the book, it tells you what the URL is for it. If you just go to ricksteves.com/Hippie Trail, you can see the photograph of every single page of the original journal and lots of photographs. And if you snuck in without buying the book, you don't need to because you can just read it there. Okay. So, but it is, we had to edit the book just for readability because it was just a few too many trips to the toilet and a few too much woke up, had breakfast, that kind of stuff. So, but I wanted to be very careful in the book to have the same spirit, the same raw, unguarded, candid, unpolitically correct 23-year-old kid running around the world with his best buddy, okay? So that was my intention with the way we edited the book that you've got today. But when I look at this 2 pages out of 200 there, 60,000 words, I'm impressed by the penmanship. I can't read my writing now. My writing is so bad, but it was really good. And I was so diligent about writing that 3/4 of the way through the trip, I would do an assessment of where am I at with the page count. And I would then kind of extrapolate how many pages I do need and how many pages I've got. And then I actually would adjust my font size. So I would have just enough pages to do the whole trip, because it would really be frustrating if you ran out of pages 3 days before the trip was over. The fact that I wrote it, and when I discovered it, it was in COVID. I had some time on my hands, you know, if you're a travel writer and tour guide. And it was sort of a sabbatical for me, and I was pawing through old stuff, and I found this hardback journal, and I read it, and it was, I thought it was surprisingly interesting. It was like an anthropological dig into a 23-year-old named Rick Steves. I'm 3 times as old as that now. And to be able to, I forgot a lot of that stuff, but it was so vivid and it came back when I read it. And I'm very concerned about not doing vanity press. So I thought, I find it interesting, and my mom would love this. But I passed it by my publisher, and they said, this is great, we got to publish this. And what was a perfect storm of kind of circumstances, I photographed it really lovingly with the classic old Pentax K1000. And if you're there's a lot of people here that can remember canisters of film, right? And a fully manual camera. You know, you'd have the aperture and you'd have the shutter speed. How much depth of field do you want? You don't have portrait mode, you have less depth of field, you know? You have, well, for instance, you didn't want to you see a beautiful scene and you don't want to get up there and do all this. You preset it on 5 yards away and in the shade, and then you walk through the market, and if you see something really good, make sure it's in the shade and you get 5 yards away, and boom, you got it, you see. If you got a whole bunch of kids, and there's always kids tracking you when you're traveling in the developing world, they're just jumping up and down, you pull out their camera, they want to get it. So you go like this, and they all gather over there, and then you go, click. Perfect, you see. So when you take these pictures, you don't know if they're turning out or not, because you got to take them home and mail them out and get them back. And if you're carrying your bag, it's an issue. You got 15 canisters, 20 canisters, you're going to get 36 frames in a canister instead of 20. You have that option. There's only one address I remember from that decade, and it is Page Mill Road in Palo Alto. That's where you'd send your Kodak film. And then that day came when you got it in the mail, and I had trips when I got it in the mail and it was underexposed, and nobody would believe how incredible that experience I had in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco was. But this was perfectly exposed, and the photograph survived the 40 years in darkness, and it was all there. And then 1978 was the last year you could do the Hippie Trail. This was a thing in the 60s and the 70s when the Beatles were going to India to hang out with the Maharishi and so on, you know. And I was just on the tail end of it, and the next year the Shah fell, and Khomeini came in and turned Iran into the theocratic dictatorship they've got today. And the next year the USSR invaded Afghanistan and almost crippled itself by trying to beat the Afghans. And then the next year there was no more hippies going across. So it was a cool pile of good luck that this thing even ever happened. When I started actually seriously travel writing, I had no more bandwidth to write the journal, so I didn't write any journals since then, and I put the same energy into writing books. So I had to do one or the other. But I still love that idea when I'm traveling. I've got my little black moleskine in my shirt pocket. It looks kind of like a passport sticking out of your shirt pocket, which is sort of, people think, you got your passport there. No, I don't, just relax, it's my notebook. But I would just always take notes. It's a very important trick if you're writing in the field. And then for me, it's a ritual. I must have 100 of these little moleskinis filled up with little scratchy writing. And then I'd always go to the hotel that night and diligently type it into my laptop. Like that. There's my moleskine. And when you're done with the page, you just put a little pencil line across it, and then you know that's in the computer. And then you figure that out, get it into the new edition of the book, email it home, and the next season, everybody's got an up-to-date guidebook. So that's what I do now. I'm still doing it for 3 months out of the year, just like I was back then, but no bandwidth for the journals. Normally when I get a crowd together like this, I want to teach practical skills. I would love, with this crowd here, to talk about trip planning, packing, safety, communicating, transportation, eating, sleeping, and avoiding crowds. But I have a new TV show that covers all of that in an amazing hour, and it just debuted in public television last month, and you can go home, or anytime you want, you can watch that lecture on TV. Every show I've ever made is on my website for free, but I hope that you are a supporter of public television and you can see it on that app. And public television, by the way, is going to become ever more important every week that passes. And it's very hard for me not to get too many little tangents, but I'm gonna tonight. They're gonna line out public television. If they can't handle helping hungry people across the sea, how could they, and they can't handle protect the environment, how are they gonna ever afford $100 million a year for 300 million people? That's as much as we spend happily on military marching bands, but we can't afford that for quality broadcasting. Wealthy cities, elite cities like Seattle and Denver and Boston and LA, we'll have our public television, no problem. We'll have our public radio. But the government subsidizing of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that enables quality media to go to hard scrabble places that are dead-end economies with frustrated people that are angry. And those are the little communities, those little scrappy, disgruntled corners of our country that now will have no alternative but to Fox-type news, to shape their worldview, because they're certainly not going to get a passport and shape it with their own experience. I just think it's so important to recognize the power of media and the power of beautiful institutions like Town Hall to bring people together. Bring people together. So the making of a travel writer, what I'm going to try to do is to be analyzing myself and seeing how my passions were yet to hatch, but you could see how they were there and ready to grow. Heading from Europe, all around Europe, in the decade since I did this trip, I'm really excited about reminding people it is meeting locals that carbonates the experience. You've got to meet people. When I'm hiking in the Italian Riviera, stumble onto an abbey and a church, and I go into the church and I get talking with the monk who runs the abbey, and then a few minutes later he says, I've got some homemade limoncello in the abbey. Would you like to come in and help me drink it? Well, what do you see, I actually got drunk with a monk on the Italian Riviera. That's meeting the people. You gotta make serendipity happen, when you're traveling. And we did that on the Hippie Trail, and that's fundamental to good travel today. Anybody can do that. We've got to get out of our comfort zone. We've got to eat snails in France. And we got to understand that if you've never had a snail in France, you don't know if it's good or not. You can't have escargot here and say, I don't like it. You've got to have it where they know how to do it right, and you're surrounded by all that ambiance in Burgundy. So that's something that I've learned in the Hippie Trail sort of experience, and then you come home and you can incorporate that into your European teaching. You need to be a cultural chameleon. You need to change with each culture as you cross borders. I physically change. I never work hard all day long in Seattle and go home and crave a nice cloudy glass of ouzo. Do you? I don't even like the flavor of ouzo in this hemisphere. But I won't let a sun go down on a Greek island without finding a good little perch, buying a hunk of octopus, and sitting there and enjoying my cloudy glass of ouzo, because I'm going local. It's so almost clichetic, but on that Hippie Trail, we went local. I'm also, in my teaching, very enthusiastic about this notion that the more understanding you bring to your sightseeing, the more you get out of it. Everybody wants a budget tip, I can't save you money for seeing the Pont du Gard, but I can double your joy of the visit if I could just have 2 minutes of your time and attention to explain to you what an aqueduct is all about. You know this famous aqueduct in the south of France, the Pont du Gard, near Avignon. It's not actually an aqueduct. It's the most scenic bridge in a 30-mile-long aqueduct with a little man-made river on the top designed to flow water into the city of Nîmes without peasants carrying it there, using gravity. Engineered so it drops 1 inch every 100 yards for 30 miles. You can even walk up there in that little square river. That was less than a minute to give you a sense of what this aqueduct was. 90% of the Americans that see that place, they just don't. Nobody told them what it is. It's tricky. So you need to take the initiative to understand what you're going to be experiencing in your travels. So these are the lessons I'm going to be picking up. The trip started, I've been doing this talk now for 10 nights in a row, and it's so hard to get it not so long. But I've been inclined to tell stories all along the way, but that's what the book's for. So I'll resist to tell you the stories about going through Yugoslavia and Bulgaria during communist times. Coming into Istanbul is always exciting. This is a modern shot of a city of 20 million people. Back in the 70s, it was still a sprawling, vibrant place. It was amazing. And when I go there, it's so clear to me this is where East meets West, where Asia comes to Europe. It was the most important city in Europe for 400 years when the Rome fell in the West, and it was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire and then the Byzantine Empire. And when you go to Istanbul today, it's just a chance to lose yourself in that sea of humanity. And losing myself in that sea of humanity was exactly what I did to kick off this Hippie Trail. There was, this is the jumping off point for all the backpackers on this trail. And when we left, heading east from Istanbul, it was clear to us, not a soul knew we existed between Istanbul and Seattle. That's pretty exciting. And we didn't know a soul between Istanbul and Seattle. There was no internet. There was no parents to come in and help you out if you run out of money. All your money was in your money belt. And you were a rich, white, naive Westerner, rich in the terms of where you're going, and very vulnerable. You're not very street smart. And it was exciting to be gathering there. There was not a lot of information. I mean, now there's a glut of information. Part of my work is to help sort through the information and curate it. But back then, there was no real guidebook for the Hippie Trail. There was the pudding shop. The pudding shop is a cafeteria today. It's in my book. It's one of my favorite little, cheap and cheery restaurants in Istanbul. But back then, it was the hub of all the hippie travelers. They'd meet there. There was a famous bulletin board where you could, team up and share notes and all this kind of thing. Information. One thing I really took out of this experience was the importance of information. When I think back on it, I wasn't aware of this. Now, that's the fun of this for me, because I was so settled in going in a different direction in my life at that time. I knew I was going to go on this epic road trip. I needed information. There was no good book. But at the experimental college at the University of Washington, there was an older hippie who had done it. And for $10, you could go to his class, and he'd tell you all the ins and outs of that trip. And it was like, this is a godsend. This is exactly what I need. I've got so many questions. And we gathered together with 20 other backpackers, and this guy held court, and he just phoned it in. He was lazy. He was sloppy. He didn't care about us. It was the most, I remember, I was angry. I left there angry. Weirdly, for me, angry. And I think back, why was that? Because he had information and I needed it for my travels. And I've got this strange passion for recognizing the value of good information. Information empowers you when you're a traveler. And that's what I produce. That's why I love my work so much. I get to produce information that helps other people travel better. Content is king, we like to say. So I was frustrated by that. When we set off going east from Istanbul, I remember anytime I was on a long bus ride, I would literally go through the bus, and any Westerner on the bus, any tourist who wasn't a local, would likely have some kind of information, some scrappy little bit of information, and I would borrow it, and I'd take it back to my seat, and I would read it, and I would soak it up, because I needed that information. One bit of information we did have was the map. We had a great map, and every so often we'd unfold it, and it was just daunting. We'd been, slogging away at our eastward trek. We'd open up the map, and we'd see we've gone that far now. We didn't measure it in terms of miles or kilometers to Kathmandu. We measured the distance by how many borders do we have to cross yet. The borders were really the hurdles. They were the stressful things. And the area in between was just long bus rides and truck rides and train rides. But here we start in Istanbul, and you can kind of follow the red upper road. And, a 2-day, sorry, I don't have a pointer on this thing, but a 2-day bus ride from Istanbul to Tehran, and then cut across Iran, the most godforsaken border I've ever been between Iran and Afghanistan, two big cities in Afghanistan, Herat in the west and Kabul in the east, over Khyber Pass, across Pakistan, side trip north for a vacation from our vacation in Kashmir, and then back down to Delhi, all the famous sites in India, and finish off at the end of the hippies' rainbow, Kathmandu. Wow, I'm so thankful I took this trip. I didn't know it was a little cottage industry of tour companies taking people. I was not aware of that, because Gene and I just ad-libbed it. But there is the option of just getting together with a bunch of people and taking a bus tour. One reason I like this bus tour shot, it makes me just feel like my bus tours are really luxury. A lot of people wonder, can women do this thing? You know, it's scary for men, and women have to be very careful when they're traveling in crazy corners of this world. Is it realistic? Is it safe? Is it responsible for a woman to do this? I've never felt comfortable saying what is okay for women to do, because it varies from woman to woman, and how would I know? But judging from what I saw, there was lots of women. About half of the people on this bus were women, and there was a lot of very tough women on the road going on the Hippie Trail. And I'm inspired to give this talk and to make a big deal about this book, to a certain degree, by the women in my office. I employ 100 people up in Edmonds. Most of them are women, and they are great travelers. And several of them have just gone off on hippie trails themselves today. You know, and we'll talk about that later, but the Hippie Trail is not Istanbul to Kathmandu. It's getting away from home. It's getting away from home. Think about Muhammad. He makes it one of the 5 pillars of Islam is to leave your home and trek all the way to Mecca, right? Every devout Muslim is supposed to go to Mecca. My Muslim friends explained to me that that's not so important to go to Mecca. The whole idea Muhammad had was to get away from home once in your life, to understand how big the world is, how big God's creation is, to recognize that you learn more about your home sometimes by leaving it and looking at it from a distance. And when you travel, you understand why Muhammad said, "Don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled." I just really love that sort of sensibility. The point is, young people, men or women, young at heart people, they can have their hippie trail adventure today on a bicycle in the deep south of the United States, or hitchhiking across Central America, or who knows what. There are ways to do that today. Imagine that. There's like 25 backpackers here, and they would all just pile into the back of that convertible bus, and big tires, because it's all terrain, whether you like it or not. So that was, everybody was heading east. We took public transit. We took the buses. And I remember in Istanbul, it was a big decision. We're going to be on this bus for 48 hours to go to Tehran. And we wanted to get a nicer bus company, and we bought tickets, and I think it was like row 7, A and B. We had it right there. It said row 7, A and B. And then we're on the bus slot, and the bus comes in, and the bus door opens, and everybody just stampedes onto the bus. I remember just thinking, why are they stampeding? That's so crazy. And then we just said, let's just relax. We're cool. We've got seats. And so then everybody's in, and we kind of step onto the bus, and by row 3, it occurs to us numbers don't even matter. Everybody just got a seat. So there were the right number of seats, but we got the last 2, and they were the afterthought seats that were screwed onto the very back seat over the stairwell. And they didn't, none of the seats were comfortable, but all the seats reclined a little bit except for ours. Ours was they were just a little cage there, and it was bolt upright. It was really hot and bumpy and noisy over, I don't know what part of the motor we're over or whatever, but it was a horrible seat. And it was for 48 hours. And we just thought, this is going to be a long ride. And every time I would stand up to stretch, the driver was always looking in his mirror, and he would see me, and he would yell, "Mister, sit down." And he had it out for me. He just was not, for some reason, he didn't like me. And he was the driver. And we called him the pirate. He just seemed like a pirate. And he was a good driver, though, so that's the most important thing. And he drove a long day, and then when he was going to give the wheel over to the first mate there, and he was just walking back. I remember he was just walking to get to the back of the bus to spread out in the little bed behind the last seats. And before he even got settled in, the first mate had driven us off the road. And there was smoke, and there were sparks, and there were people screaming, and I thought, this is going to be a short hippie trail trip. But thankfully, nobody got hurt. It just took us a day to get the bus out of that and fixed up and on the way. And now nobody would let the other guy drive, so it was the pirate only, all the way to Tehran. The pirate just said, what the heck, there's no schedule anymore, I'm in control here, so he just ruled it like an autocrat. And I remember one day, he said, this bus is smelling. Everybody must go into the river and take a bath. Never has that happened to me on a bus before. But there's a lot of fun things that one of the best articles I ever wrote a long, long time ago was just on this epic ride from Istanbul to Tehran on this thing. And it's just the kind of memories you have when you're going. At night, the English-speaking people would kind of hang out together in a hotel, and then the French-speaking people would hang out together. And I remember we'd gather, and we would just talk about what's the likelihood we're actually going to get to Tehran, you know? And the police would come, and I remember they said, whose cigarettes are these? And we're all smart enough to know, don't touch those cigarettes. There's something in them, and they'll frame us if we say they're ours. So we were learning about, you know, the complications of the road, really. It was interesting to me. It was like we were privileged kids. We had stable lives. Our lives were predictable. We were so far from home, no hint of any guardrails or any oversight. And it was almost like we wanted to be poor, and we succeeded. The accommodations didn't bother us. Laying on the ground didn't bother us. Just not even knowing where your next hotel's going to be, that's part of the fun. And it kind of stayed with me. I still have a little bit of that in me, especially this idea of not knowing where your hotel's going to be. Years later, I would take groups around Europe, and for a while I would do an annual charity tour, where it was a free tour if you gave that much money to Bread for the World. And I kind of liked it because I thought, this could be really miserable and nobody can complain because I'm not getting any money. But I was wrong. They could complain even though I wasn't getting any money. But I remember on those tours, I would do it with no reservations, just for the challenge of having 20 people on a bus, and I could just scramble and find reservations as we went. And it was really, for me, it was really fun. But as a teacher and a guide on the bus, it was very frustrating because I learned nobody could concentrate on what I was saying. They couldn't focus on what I was saying after about 3 o'clock if we didn't have beds reserved for us. After 3 o'clock, that was the only thing that mattered. Everybody was so uptight about, am I going to be homeless tonight? And I remember I had a harsher approach to broadening people's perspectives through travel. And I wanted to subject on them realities. And, you know, I I didn't have much of a first aid kit, but I had Valium that I could give people. And I remember inflicting things on people that you wouldn't normally inflict. And I kept thinking, there might be homeless tonight. Americans are remarkable on how that was so frightening, and we're able to totally ignore the issue of homelessness all around us in our day-to-day lives, you know. And I just had that little hang-up. But I learned later that's not a good way to make people sensitive to those kind of problems. But these little hotels that the pirate put us in were pretty bad. I remember one hotel was so, the sheets were clearly not changed from the person who was there the night before. So I went to the desk and I explained it, and the man said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he came into my room and he turned the sheets over. So we got into Tehran finally, and when I think about it, I love to think of how naive and oblivious and green I was. It's interesting when you get more tuned into something and you study it and you take a serious interest in it. And then you think about how was my experience before I had that understanding when I was in the same place. And there's a lot of ideas that I could get into there, but the one obvious one is I was in Tehran, and if you go into the market, the Shah was still in power, but he was clearly on his last legs. And I remember thinking in the market, okay, he's a dictator, so everybody has to buy his picture and they hang it in their home. And it had a very cheap frame and the thinnest glass that would just, if you dropped it, it'd just break into shards. And it said, I had this sense that in a year, all of those portraits are going to fall to the ground and be broken. And I'm sure they were. I mean, it was just these sort of little takeaway thoughts I find very interesting when you look back on a trip. These guys look friendly, but these are the same faces that filled our TV screen saying "Death to America" the next year, right? Death to America. Later on, I mean, we all got captivated by Ted Koppel and the hostage crisis. One reason I did my Iran show was because at a later date, I realized how embarrassing it is that the hostage crisis is what is the basis of the typical American's understanding of 70 million people in a very proud and important country called Iran. We just had no clue what Iran was all about and what their hang-ups were. And that's a whole nother lecture, but that's why I went to Iran, was to understand what's their baggage. We always want people to be thoughtful or forgiving and give us a little wiggle room because of our 9/11 baggage, I think. Well, Iran's got baggage that we should be mindful of also. If you're curious about that, I made a 1-hour TV show about Iran, and you can watch it again. Anything I've ever made on my website or at PBS with the Passport app. You know, those guys, when they were shaking their fist, they were paid to go there. They were bussed in. They were told what to say, "Death to America," and then it was framed so you could have 50 people looking like it was 500 people if they just went from edge to edge of the camera. And it really was effective. And it was quite a media circus. I mean, it was a terrible thing that they took our embassy and so on, but they sure milked it from a propaganda point of view. So cutting across Iran was exciting, and then we came to the most godforsaken place I've ever been on this planet, the border between Iran and Afghanistan. And it's really interesting when we travel. These days, most of us, when we travel, we fly from capital city to capital city. We don't have the experience of going overland across a border. And sometimes a border is a river, sometimes it's a ridge. I think a lot of times it's just desirable land peters out. And one tribe runs out of reason to live there, and then there's no reason to live there, and then the next tribe peters in, you see. And that's how it is between Iran and Afghanistan. There's a border here, a no man's land, and a border there. The bus takes you here, then you're on your own. I like these kind of situations where the public transportation peters out also. It's just fewer and fewer people are going to the border, and then you actually have to walk across the border and then ad lib it going beyond on the other side. So I think this would be in the no man's land between the borders, judging from the fact that 3 Hippie Trail people were going across there. You're walking from the border of Iran to the border of Afghanistan. When you got to the border, I remember the hard pan surroundings were decorated with disassembled VW buses. It was just a wasteland of taken apart VW buses because stupid hippies were trying to take drugs across the border, and any hippie that goes to the border is going to get their car taken apart if the customs people feel like it. And some of the hippies just say, well, screw it, we're traveling on without our bus, you know. Back then, well, you remember the movie Midnight Express? Well, anybody who watched that would not want to take drugs across a border. Drugs were so cheap, why would you bother, you know? So at the border, there was these cloudy glass cases, and they were display cases, like a little mini museum of stupid hippies that got caught with marijuana at the border and where they are in jail now. And you could see how they tried to hide their drugs and a little story about what happened. And then, of course, this is a long time ago, but I wrote it. It's funny, I have these memories, I read about it in the journal, and then when I get a chance, as I've been doing this tour, I've talked to a lot of people who've done the Hippie Trail in the 70s. And I met a guy who did it a few days ago, and I said, because I'm just trying to affirm this, because it's hard to believe that there was that museum there. I said, do you remember at the border of Afghanistan, there was a little museum? And he goes, oh yeah, where all the drug smugglers were displayed what they did wrong and how they caught it. Yeah, so I was there. Another thing about crossing the border is you have what's called a yellow international certificate of vaccination. And if you're an older traveler, you remember you never went away from home without your passport with your yellow international certificate of vaccination inside of it. And I don't know why you don't just call it the international certificate of vaccination, but I've never heard anybody say anything other than the yellow international certificate of vaccination. So even in Europe, you know, to go to France, to Spain, to get from Europe back to the United States, you had to show your yellow international certificate of vaccination. I was careful. We were always careful to have the right shots. There's a lot of adulting along the Hippie Trail. When you're in one big city, you think about shots that you need, you think about visas that you need, you think about tickets you need, and so on, changing money. And so we were crossing the border, and for some reason, Gene's yellow international certificate of vaccination was not complete. He needed one shot. Now, it's a drag to need a shot, but it's a real drag to need a shot here. So we waited in the clinic for a couple hours until the nurse or the doctor came, and I was sitting there like a concerned mother with my friend as he's in the doctor's office, and I remember looking at him expose his shoulder, and then I remember seeing the needle literally bend as they tried to put it into his arm. They should probably swap out that needle sooner or later. But I'm glad I had my yellow international certificate of vaccination in good order, I'll tell you that. When you cross a border, you put your bag on your lap. It's usually on the roof of the van or the bus. But when you're approaching the border, the hippies would be smart to put it on their lap and look through it to make sure nothing's been put in there. Because there's all sorts of scams going on, all sorts of shady characters in cahoots with the police and the customs. And you don't want to get caught at the border with something that wasn't yours, but it looks like it's yours at the border. So we would have our bag on our laps. The other thing is, you'd have to change money. You didn't have ATMs. You didn't have euros that worked in all the different countries. Every country had its own proud currency. Proud as they may be, currencies were thrown away and restarted routinely along the way. So famously, as you traveled along, the traveler didn't know what color this year's currency was. And if anyone was stuck with a lot of, light blue currency, when now it's kind of brown, they'd just sell that to tourists. So we were always a little on edge when we were buying new currency, because we hoped that was the actual currency that was going to work when we got to the nearest city. And we didn't have any fallback. If we got, aced out of our money, I don't know how we would have got out of India. It was kind of scary that way. So we loaded up and got on a minibus to go to Herat, the first city in Afghanistan. 2 hours into Afghanistan, the bus pulls over in the middle of nowhere, and the first mate of the driver turns around and he holds up a big knife. I just thought, that looks like a Bowie knife, if you remember those old Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone knives. And he said, the cost to go to Herat has just doubled. It will now be $3 instead of $1.50 or whatever. And many of us were just indignant. That's not right. I know you think I'm loaded, and I may be, but it's just not right for you to do this to visitors to your country. And we're not going to do it. We're not paying. And there's a very wise older Indian man, and I remember he stood up and he goes, take a moment to calm down, please. This might be worth spending $1.50 for your lives. So I think we should all happily pay the extra money, and we will all get to Herat in one piece, safe and sound. And I think he was quite wise. So we paid it, and it was just a reminder of how vulnerable we were. It was kind of lawless. And we got to Herat. And don't read that caption yet, because I got to talk about some other stuff.
Who think my marijuana virginity?
Yeah, me too. So when we got to Herat is all along the way. It's a slog to do this, and it was kind of exhausting, kind of stressful, not a normal vacation. And we were very aware that we could, in like 4 days, we could be back in the Greek Isles. hanging out with all the cool kids and all the cute girls. And it's a paradise for backpackers in the Greek Isles. And what were we doing? We were going across the border with dull needles into Afghanistan. And we kept thinking, it's not too late. We could turn around, but neither of us was going to. You sure you don't want to? So we just kept going east. But when we finally got to Herat, we thought, nope, we're going all the way to India. There's no turning around. And it kicked into gear. Herat was wonderful. It was just beautiful. A lot of the time, Jean was sick. A lot of people were sick along the Hippie Trail. It doesn't show in the photographs, but it's the case. In fact, there's a little saying that along the Hippie Trail people would say, there's two kinds of travelers on the Hippie Trail, people who know they have worms and people who don't know they have worms. And we knew Jean had worms. Now, as far as marijuana goes, this is the thing that is anticipation. As soon as you get out of Iran and into Afghanistan and India and Nepal, those are very marijuana-friendly places. And I knew it. And I was an interesting guy here at the University of Washington. I had a lot of cool friends who smoked pot, but I would never smoke pot here. I was like a good kid that didn't want to carelessly, regrettably lose his or her virginity. I wanted to do it in a way that I would be still respect myself in the morning, And I wanted to do it where it felt right culturally. And it felt so right in Afghanistan. It was a slam dunk. If you ever want to lose your marijuana virginity, you do it in Afghanistan, before the Taliban took over, okay? So, but you wouldn't do it on the street. Just like Brittany Griner has spent some unpleasant time in Moscow for just having some gummies with her. Mean-spirited local law enforcement officers would love to see a first world person with a little marijuana in the streets. But in our hotel room, we could get away with it. And so Gene was helping me because he's more experienced, and he went out and scored some good stuff. And I don't even know if it was hash or flower or what. But we smoked it, and Gene says, I want to warn you, a lot of times on their first time they smoke, they don't actually get high. So be prepared for that. It might take a couple of tries. So we smoked, and I remember just looking at the naked light bulbs hanging from the ceiling and thinking, is that breathing? I think it's breathing. And I went up onto the rooftop, and I remember I went up on the rooftop just to get fresh air and enjoy the view, and found myself standing next to the janitor of the place. And we were both just marveling at how bright the stars were. And then looking down on the street, chariots were charging by. And in Herat, that was the mode of transportation. Two-wheeled chariots with fast horses. And after dark, the torches came out. And the streets were just filled with chariots, like kids cruising, I suppose, in the 1960s in the United States. It was gorgeous. It was at this point in our trip that we decided, for our own sanity and our mental health and everything, we would spend a little more for hotels to have a refuge. It's nice to have a refuge that keeps the riffraff out, where you can leave your camera on the bed safely, where nobody's going to be begging from you or just in your face when you want to be relaxing and not the center of attention, where you've got a swimming pool where the water's treated. It's usually the only hotel in town where people have their weddings. And there was a wedding going on that night. And we enjoyed the music, and then we enjoyed walking through the town. And from this point onward in the journal, when I read it, I'm always wondering, that sounds really interesting. Was I high, or was it really that good? So I can't tell you on the writing if I was describing what state of mind I was in when I was describing stuff. But the next morning, I remember walking around in Herat, falling in love with the city. And there was a rhythm to it. It seemed like every 5 strides, there would be a new shop, a new tea house, a new artisan. And I walked along there, and it was, and I'm thinking back on it now because I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I was just in love with the nobility of hard labor and pride and simple folk doing what they're parents did, in a town that's always been their hometown, in a land where things are shaped by the wear your hands put on it. And what a loss it is in our world that there's nothing that we own that ever gets that worn, because we'll go buy a new plastic version of it, that's just mass produced. There's something just quality about a tailor or a artisan on the street proudly doing his work. And I don't want to be romantic about poverty and all that kind of stuff, but this just really charmed me. And I think I appreciate that in Europe also. And you see that. And that's one of my favorite things about traveling in Europe, is just locating that also. I think one of my favorite souvenirs that I've ever had was a backgammon board I bought in Turkey. And the backgammon board is handmade. It's inlaid wood. The long skinny triangles in the backgammon board, those are lighter wood and a softer wood, and the background is really dark and hard. And over years of happiness and playing with friends on the backgammon board, the triangles have been worn down. So it had that topography of conviviality. And I just love it. And when I open it up, I see my handmade dice. Dice where the 3 dots don't line up. It's still 3, but they're not perfectly straight. I treasure my handmade dice. And I love the fact that even decades later, when I open it up, I can still smell the tea and the tobacco and the community joy, the togetherness. And that's just something that it's hard to put it into words, but it's delightful. And you wouldn't know that without traveling and getting yourself away from our norm and then taking time to be poetic about it. We could get on bikes anywhere, and just a great thing about bikes is it gets you away from the beggar kids, so you can just kind of scram and you're into something else, and you can stay where you want and you can escape when you need to. And then we took the long ride from Herat to Kabul. And we wanted to get one of the best bus companies around, cont'd, because we wanted to be punctual and safe and none of this pirate craziness. And it was a great ride. I remember my takeaway from spending a day on the bus going from Herat to Kabul, a long day, was monochrome. Everything was one color. When you looked at it, it was just that. If there's a town there, it was camouflaged. It was that same exact color. If there was a cemetery, it was camouflaged. It was the same color, the same material, all those Muslim tombstones. When it was time to take a potty stop, you just stop anywhere. The men would go on this side, and the women would go on that side of the street. The men would just pee. The women all had their big dresses, their robes or something, and they would serve as a modesty tent. And they would make a nice tent. And I remember looking at the women, not that I was looking at women when they're going to the bathroom, but I thought this was interesting. And it looked like a chess set or something. All the women were just there. And then I remember everything was so dry, and when they got up and got on the bus, everything was wet. It was a beautiful moment. When it was time to pray, stop the bus, everybody get out, unfold their little prayer rugs, face Mecca, and have a few moments stretching and remembering God. It was a delightful trip. When we wanted to stop and get some tea, we'd stop and you'd just go into this place. Yes, that's a goat getting skinned. It's not a dog. It's a goat. That'd just be happening, and we're having our tea and we're watching the goat getting skinned. It's what I love about traveling in places like this. And then I realized our driver and the first mate were way in the back of the tea house, passing around a big, giant pipe, getting high as can be. And the half-hour break ended up being about an hour. And finally, the driver came out and was just glassy-eyed as can be, just shit-faced. And he said, "Okay, back on the bus. We're going to Kabul." Great. All right. So it was just on the Hippie Trail. On the bus, I was struck by how interesting I was to the little kids. And they would just stare at me, literally for hours. And I would just make a point of staring at them. And I stared at them like was just studying her little beautiful face, and she was just studying my weird, faraway being, you know. How different, how mysterious must I have been? What is this man, this tall man with this sort of confidence, but who's kind of gawky, who seems to know, how did he get here? What's he doing, you know? It was so interesting. And this is how I spent my bus drive, was looking at little kids and their mothers. On the left is her mother. And it reminded me, oh boy, it is not a man's, it's a man's world in the streets. And I understand it's the women wear the pants in the domestic world, but it's a harsh reality for women in this part of the world, in a very conservative Muslim society. Remember, this is where the Taliban rules now, and women can't even get an education. The restraints on women are just so heartbreaking. When I'm on the road in a country like this, I try my very best not to be judgmental. I just want to learn about it. I want to try to understand it. It doesn't accomplish anything to judge it and be pissed off by it. I just want to know why. What is the rationale for this? And I'm reminded that every society is on its own parallel evolutionary track. And not every society has had its revolution, or its Reformation, or its Renaissance, or its Vatican II, or its civil liberties movement, or its women's suffrage movement. You know, these are milestones for our society also. I mean, we used to do all sorts of bad things just 200 years ago. That's not that long ago in the sweep of things. So we have to really be careful when we're so judgmental and impatient with societies. I think everybody's trying to get there. And you go forward, and then sometimes you go backwards. And you go forward, and something happens, and you roll back. It's history. And there are parallel societies doing the same thing. And with our impatience, sometimes we try to push things along, and it's not productive. I think if you care about the other societies, you create an environment where they can, on their own terms, evolve like we have. That's way too nuanced for our current outlook on the world. When you just do things with chainsaws and wood chippers. But, you know, it is an option to be graceful with other societies, whether we agree with them or not, and be patient a little bit. But these are things you think about when you're on the road, ideally. It should cause you to be thoughtful about things. We came into Kabul, and after a few days in Kabul, my takeaway was Afghanistan is not made to have a big, modern, Western-style city. It seemed so out of place to me. And people who wore Western clothes there, they just presented themselves as awkward. I wish I was wearing my tribal robe. It was a very interesting time in Kabul. And Jean was sick, so I was just roaming around on my own. And I went to a cafeteria where all the backpackers go for lunch. I was just sitting there, and a man joined me. It wasn't this guy, but a man sat down. He said, "Can I join you?" I said, "You already have." He said, "Are you an American?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'm a professor here in Afghanistan, and I want you to know that a third of the people on this planet eat with spoons and forks like you do. A third of the people eat with chopsticks. And a third of the people eat with fingers, like I do. And we're all civilized just the same." I can still hear that. It's exact phrasing he said. And we're all civilized just the same. And I thought, whoa, you've got a chip on your shoulder about this. Every day, you join, apparently, a tourist in the tourist cafeteria, and you remind him of that. And then later on, as I traveled on, it occurred to me, he's right. I thought less of him because he ate with his fingers, which is wrong. It's very ethnocentric. I love the challenge of not being ethnocentric, and I love the importance of recognizing that whether we know it or not, or whether we like it or not, we are ethnocentric. And it's good to get out of that zone, you know, and to listen to people and to learn from it. On my next trip to India, I remember my mission was to get comfortable eating with my hands. And throughout India, I went to nice restaurants, patronized not by tourists, but by professional locals. And I'm sure there was a drawer somewhere with metal utensils for people who wanted to stab their food with something dirty and metal and shovel it into their mouths. But elegant local people found it a little more right to use your fingers for what God gave them to you for and nourish yourself. It's a beautiful notion. And there was a ceremonial sink in the middle of the room where everybody would wash their hands, and then they would eat gracefully with their fingers. And then they'd wash their hands before they went. It became quite natural for me. I think I had to be retrained when I got home, okay? But it's just a humbling thing. And a lot of people ask me all the time, what's your favorite country? And they think I'm going to say Italy or, France or something like that. And I say India. And they say, why India? And it's really the truth. India just romances me. It charms me. It challenges me. It wallops my ethnocentricity. It rearranges all my cultural furniture. It humbles me. I was raised thinking the world is a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to get there. And when you travel, you realize, no, we do it. It's our way. It's all right. But it's not right, and that's not wrong. And I get this feeling now in our culture and the way we're addressing the rest of the world that not only can we not let people do their own thing, but if they don't do it our way, we don't want to allow it. I mean, it's just not right. And if you travel a little bit, you'd celebrate the fact that we're not the norm. I really love that. So India, it's a hard place to write about. It's a hard place to teach. I don't teach India at all because it's a personal thing how people relate to it. But for me, I thought I knew, it humbled me. I thought I knew what time is. And then I go to India and time is not money. Think about how we treat time. It's betrayed by how we talk about it. We spend it, we waste it, we invest it. Time is money for us. There's even a phrase, time is money. Well, the bureaucrats in India, they know how to push my button. They treat time like bubblegum, and it really pisses me off. My time is valuable. It's bubblegum in India. Bureaucrats, they've got all the time in the world. They're making $100 a month, and you're going to have to wait. And I find that just fascinating. I find it really humbling. I thought I knew music. On my next trip to India, I flew home with a sitar. I was so fascinated by the fact that I know Beethoven and I know Chopin is sophisticated and beautiful. And then I get to India and I hear classical music and it just sounds garbage to me. And then I realize, but wait a minute, it's just as sophisticated as ours. And it doesn't speak the same language. There's no meter and there's no mode in the way we know meter and mode. I mean, I would think music is made by meter and mode. Is it cut time? Is it waltz time? Is it 4/4 time, 6/8 time? Let's go, I want to have a meter. And then the mode. Is it happy and major or is it sad and minor or whatever? No, it doesn't apply to Indian music. So it's just humbling. It's not important for me to know how to appreciate Indian music. It's just important for me to appreciate that I don't appreciate Indian music. And that's what you get as a souvenir if you're traveling thoughtfully. I jumped ahead to India there. We're almost to India, but first we got to cross Khyber Pass. Khyber Pass. Back then, my favorite movie was The Man Who Would Be King. Did you ever see that movie? It's a Rudyard Kipling story. The only time I ever went to a theater and watched the movie twice in a row. It just charmed me. And this Khyber Pass is just like that. It's the fabled strategic pass. And this is 20 years before 9/11. Okay? And we're going through what on the maps it says ungovernable territories. It's like, when Vasco da Gama and Magellan and Columbus were leaving from Spain and Portugal, the maps, I understand, said, "Don't go ye here, for dragons will be found," this kind of thing. Well, that dragons are over here. That's kind of what it felt like here. And when we got to when we went through this ungovernable part, and even to this day, the tribes are ungovernable. I remember when we bought our ticket in Kabul, it came with we bought the ticket, and then they said, and we need $2 for a guarantee of safe passage. That was the term, a guarantee of safe passage. And I wasn't about to say, well, is there a student discount? You know, $2? Yes, you pay it. And then it was kind of like the robber baron castles on the Rhine River in the Middle Ages. It's that same parallel track kind of thing. Very, very analogous. So we're going east. We've got our guarantee of safe passage. We see these ungovernable tribes up above. And to me, I just was fascinated by, I was into tree houses, and this just looked like a kid's fortress. But these are real, tribal warriors with their wind-tattered flag looking down on the only road through the area that they would levy tolls from. And it was fascinating. When you think about the feistiness of the people that live here, they don't have any tech, they're very poor, but the Soviet Union could not beat them. They almost destroyed the Soviet Union's economy or something for years and years and years. A major fiasco of the USSR. And then after that, the United States learned nothing about that, and the United States spent, I think, $2 trillion trying to subdue the people in Afghanistan. $2 trillion. $2,000 billion. We could have very reasonably overcome hunger on this planet, extreme poverty with that if it was invested smartly. Rather than do that, we spent $2 trillion to become less appreciated on this planet. It was a negative. It's just complicated. It's so interesting when you travel, and you gain an appreciation for a society that does not want to be ruled by foreigners. It's a tragic situation now if you're interested in civil liberties and personal freedoms and so on, but boy, they are feisty. We kept going east, and then we got to the border. And it's the same old thing. We're sitting there at the border, bags on our laps, trying not to have anybody put anything dangerous on us, and people are coming right out of the blue. Cocaine? $20. $20, cocaine. You know, and there's police and customs people all over the place. I had to snap this photograph. It's actually kind of a cool photograph, but you couldn't get the camera up and take it. But, you're not going to say, how about $10? The police are all around, and the customs people all around. And I remember I was really in a good mood here because this was the last stop before going over the pass, and I had a wonderful big window that collapsed into the wall. And I could put my arm on the windowsill, just like Mona Lisa, when she has that beautiful setup and looking out over that beautiful Tuscan terrain. And I was going to be looking over Khyber Pass. It was just, well, there was one little downside. The person who sat there yesterday had apparently vomited because it was still crusted to the outside of the car right there. But apart from that, it was just perfect. And we headed over Khyber Pass. I am into tectonic plates. I'm not much of a geologist, but I love this thought that big masses of land crash into each other in geological time. And where the geological plates come together, you get earthquakes, you get volcanoes, you get lava, you get all sorts of excitement. And then I like the thought of demographic and cultural tectonic plates, where different peoples come together. And that's where you also get volcanoes and earthquakes and stuff. And where bodies of water come together, and you get tide rips, and you get lots of little fish, and lots of big fish, and lots of people fishing. It's coming together. And when I was aware, even though I hadn't put it into words like that this was the end of the Muslims and the beginning of the Hindus. And if I thought about it, from Istanbul to Khyber Pass, the same burned-off brown arid landscape, and a cacophony of beautiful minarets, all calling people to prayer. And then when I came out of that arid Islam, we descended into hot, muggy, graceful, fragrant, elegant Hindustan. And it was just great. Great to get to the other tectonic plate that we were going to be going through. When we got to the Indian border, it was a high-five moment. It was a great high-five moment. And I don't know why, but it was like coming home. I've wrestled with this. None of the other places were like coming home, but I knew I wanted to go to India. I knew I'd like India, and I love India. I don't know, it might be, remember, India is a subcontinent about the size of Europe that's just as diverse ethnically and linguistically. So they have to have a common language for business and for tourism and travel, and that would be English. So English is well spoken everywhere. The heritage of their difficult time as a colonial part of the British Empire. And then the British Empire left them with a wonderful train system, and they get good use out of that. And I don't know, I just liked India a lot, and we were in very good moods as we moved into that. And something we were always learning is we're doing a really good job of meeting people. And this is something that I've taken with me into my teaching in the decades since. It's just you need to be an extrovert. You need to find excuses to meet people. If you wait for people to come to you, it's not going to happen. If you hang out with your friends in the lobby of the hotel, it's not going to happen. If you're in Pakistan and you see a bunch of med students sitting in a circle studying under a tree, this is an opportunity. You've got to assume you are interesting. And we are. We are really interesting. We got even more interesting in the last month. And by the way, a lot of people have been asking me, because I'm always giving talks about going to Europe, what's it like now going to Europe? Are we going to be received okay and so on? And it's an interesting question, considering what we've done to Europe in the last couple of weeks, abandoning the climate accord, abandoning any sort of promotion of electronic cars, pulling out of NATO, embracing Putin. This is wild. And we're going to Europe on vacation. What's going to happen? I've been doing this all my life, and we've had, swings left and right. This is nothing this radical has ever been in my life. But I'm comfortable with the fact that I've always found people in foreign countries understand that other people from other countries are not necessarily responsible for whoever happens to be the leader of that country. And buffoons get elected. And people that we're not proud of get elected. And sometimes they get elected twice. Think about Italy and Berlusconi. If you read about Berlusconi, you kind of go, how could all of my Italian friends vote for this guy several times, Electorates are hard to figure out sometimes. But individuals always have this opportunity just to be human to human. It's really good. So as you travel, whether you're going to India or Europe or whatever, make yourself open. Know that if you go into a pub and you sit at a table, people will leave you alone. If you sit at the bar, people assume you want to talk. Put yourself in a situation where you can talk, assume you're interesting, and have a nice, tight definition of the Electoral College. It's perplexing, I tell you, it's perplexing. Meet the people. The world is filled with joy. The world's filled with beautiful people. It's the greatest takeaway. I'm not naive. There's bad people. There's, complicated problems. There's heartbreaking things. But generally, the more people can get to know each other, the better we're all going to be. And the more understanding you bring to your sightseeing in a faraway land especially, the less overwhelming it'll be, and you reach a critical mass of understanding, and then things just go a lot easier. Boy, in the Hindu world, that is certainly the case. And when I think back on it, again, I'm doing this detective work, looking back at the college kid Rick Steves. I actually, back in the day at the University of Washington, when tuition was $300 for a quarter, you could actually have a private class. You could design your own class and get your own professor. I know we were much more affluent back then, so we could afford this kind of stuff. And I had designed a class called Village India and had a great professor. And I learned a lot, and I got 5 credits. But I did that anticipating this moment when I got to India, and I wanted to understand what was the fabric of the community in a village in India, because you got 1 billion people there, and most of them live in villages. It was a great class, and it really helped a lot as I was delving into India.
Who was your professor?
I was afraid you're going to ask me that. Yeah, I forget who it was. was right next to Peter Sugar. Peter Sugar was at the same time. Peter Sugar was great. Okay, so Hinduism. You need to understand Hinduism, and it's a challenge for anybody going to a different religion to not be comparing and judging and so on. And really, I think it's so important to get yourself in a mindset where I'm not going to compare this to what I believe. I'm just going to get to know it and celebrate it. And some things are perplexing. How can 800 million Hindus feed their cows better than their children? You know, that always really caused me a little confusion. But there's an explanation. If you met a Hindu, you could ask them that question and you'd learn. It goes back a long time ago, and there's an explanation. But when we travel in India, they've got a caste system, and there's just a lot of stuff that's just hard to get your brain around. You'll also find different religions in the neighborhood that aren't Hindu. The Sikhs are just a wonderful, wonderful group, and their holiest place is Amritsar, and in Amritsar there is the Golden Temple. And the Sikhs are famous for being very hospitable. And you read about that and you go, okay, yeah. But you get there and you go, whoa, these people are really genuinely hospitable. It was the most warm welcome. I just wanted to kind of settle in to Amritsar. It was a wonderful spot. But we were heading north. And even before we left Seattle, we knew at this point we're going to want a place that we can just have a vacation from our odyssey. And that would be Kashmir. Kashmir, it's a war-torn part of the world because it's part of that Hindu-Muslim problem of the Indian subcontinent. A long time ago, if I understand it correctly, it was just all mixed together, Hindus and Muslims. After India won its freedom, they decided we're going to separate the Muslims and the Hindus. We're going to do ethnic cleansing or whatever and send all the Muslims east or west, East Pakistan or West Pakistan, Pakistan or Bangladesh, and then this will be Hindus. Kashmir in the north is ruled by Hindus, but it's populated by Muslims. And it's always had a civil war smoldering. And we were there during a peaceful time when it was delightful. And now I think it's open to tourism, but a lot of times it's closed to tourism. But when we got up there, baby, that was nice. Look at that. High altitude, beautiful mountains, beautiful lakes, beautiful people. You come into Srinagar, the big city there, and you meet a little boy with a paddle boat, and he takes you shopping for a houseboat. And a century ago, this was the resort destination. All across India, they have hill stations. And people of means will leave the squalor and the humidity and the intensity of the hot time in the lowlands, and they'll go for higher altitude. And the ultimate hill station would be Kashmir. And they had all of these houseboats, these wonderful houseboats. And of course, in this day and age, it's kind of like Airbnb kind of stuff. I mean, it's for international travelers that come in there. And we shopped around and we said, this is our vacation from our odyssey. We're going to have a nice place. We're going to spend, $10 a night if we have to, and just really live large. And we got Muzaffar's houseboat. It had a beautiful veranda on the top. It had a whole family of servants living just under the trees behind us. We had our own shikara boat to take us wherever we wanted. And we washed our clothes and started drinking tea and just enjoying the moment. It was a beautiful, beautiful vacation from our trek. Very, very relaxing. Kashmir. And just beautiful. Everything was gliding. I remember everything was gliding. When we went out on the boat, they don't have good keels, then we would just go stern over bow, kind of in a certain direction vaguely. But the people who knew how to use the shikaras, everything was like this. And the groceries would come to you, and we would just sit there, and I loved it. For a little adventure, we went higher yet to a mountain station called Gulmarg, and there we rented horses, and we just went exploring. And this was really off the grid. And it was a thrilling opportunity for us. And we come upon this hut. And it's fuzzy in my mind, and it's fun for me to read the journal, but these people were totally off the grid. And we woke up the father, and the whole family was happy that these two guys from somewhere far away was visiting. We hitched our horse to the little hitching rack, and we just got to know them a little bit. And it was a marvelous visit. From Srinagar, we flew down to Delhi. Delhi is the capital of the biggest democracy on the planet. I don't know, 800 million or a billion people. And when we flew, the flight was really fun. I remember going to the toilet on the airplane, and I got there, and I realized, whoa, I can see the farms down below. And I thought, whoa, I'm going to fertilize. And then I was sitting there fertilizing, and I saw a decal on the wall, and the decal on the wall was a stick figure explaining to people who had never sat on a toilet that you don't stand on the rim and squat over it. And I had to I puzzled with this. Why is there a decal explaining to people that you don't sit on this? And then I realized, oh, because people who didn't ever fly, they may have come from a village where there were no toilets, and they were raised that you don't sit on a dirty, round thing that other dirty butts have been on. You squat over it. It's just this hygienic, civilized thing to do. Again, we're not the norm. It just was humbling to me that you needed a decal on an airplane to explain to people not to squat over the rim. That's a beautiful thing about travel. We got down to Delhi, and then we traveled on, and we disrespected almost every major site in the country, including the Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal is one of those sites that it gets huge buildup. And anytime something gets huge buildup, like you've always wanted to see it, there's a 50-50 chance that it's not going to live up to the reputation, I'd say. And the Taj Mahal exceeded our high expectations. It was just gorgeous, just gorgeous. Just walking through the streets was gorgeous. I mean, it was like the zoo had been let out, and it was just, I like this word abandon when you talk about travel. Travel with abandon. A lot of us don't travel with abandon these days. When you're younger, you're probably more willing to travel with abandon, but it's a good thing to do, and write a poem while you're at it. I like the thought that you should not try to avoid culture shock. A lot of people actually say, oh no, we're going to have a way to avoid any culture shock. Culture shock's a good thing. It's constructive. It's the growing pains of a broadening perspective. It just needs to be curated. And that's what I do for a living in Europe. So we wanted some culture shock here. Again, I didn't realize that now, but I was learning that, and that would grow out of that later on when I focused my teaching just on Europe, which for me is the wading pool for world exploration. Our mission where I work is to equip and inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando. Come on. Go to Orlando, Disney World 3 or 4 times, go to Vegas, go to Cancun, back to Orlando, go to Orlando. They got another one in LA, and that's somebody's whole travel world. Can you imagine somebody that curious? What about Portugal? Just try Portugal once, then you can go back to Orlando. There's one guidebook that outsells the Rick Steves Italy guidebook, and it is the guidebook to Disney World. Year after year, when my publisher brags about how good my books are doing, look, you got the top 18 out of the top 20 books on Europe, but in the global race, there's one that always beats me. Disney World is La La Land. That's not what I do. That's a huge market. I cannot compete with La La Land in this society of ours. It's a far bigger market. I do reality travel. I would not want to write a guidebook to Orlando. And this is reality travel, what we're doing here on this Hippie Trail. And we're embracing culture shock, and we are making a concentrated effort to go where no tourist ever went. I love to leave a touristy city on a bus, a little bus, and I go until I'm out in the village country, and then I get off the bus at a point where everybody on the bus goes, no, excuse me, no tourist ever got off here, you must be mistaken. That's exactly where I'm going, thank you very much. And you get here and there's no guidebook information, there's nothing in English, there's no turnstiles, there's just a bunch of beautiful people who've never met an American in the flesh. What a moment. And you have a cultural scavenger hunt. I don't know what we're going to do, but if you meet a barber who has one stool under a tree, sit on that stool and get a shave, you know. I'm going to be in Istanbul in a couple of weeks filming, and we're going to get a shave. It's a great experience just to really just become a temporary local. Look at half of the village gathers around to watch. Not everybody draws an audience when they get a shave in that town. I bet they still remember our visit. I bet they do. Look at I just noticed this cute little wooden prop behind Jean's head there. It's a great barber's chair. What an experience. Be an extrovert. Be a little bit silly. I don't think it's cool, but you can, if you see 4 women walking with big bushels of cow salad, step right up. Excuse me, can I carry your load? I'm a gentleman. And I was just this far from her, and she was going, whoa, this is trippy. And we move it over, and I take it. And then they're giggling, and I'm struggling. And a few steps later, I go, okay, you can have it back now. But you got to do that sort of thing. We were doing it, you know, if a guy's churning his hay, can I do it? Well, sure. So he just gets the tourist doing his work, and he sits back and watches us doing it. That's just examples of being creative to get out there and break the ice and meet some people. Go to a tailor, and for a few bucks, you can have the local outfit. It just feels good. It's more comfortable, and it's a great memory. The Maharaja is the old aristocracy in India. And just like Europe has the impoverished nobility, you know, those noble families that for generations have owned that chateau in France, and now they're land rich and cash poor, and every Tuesday and every Friday they open their castle so tourists can pay $10 to go in and see it, so they can fix the roof and pay their taxes. It's the same thing in India. Maharajas have these, they got lousy limos, you know, they don't have the whole grandeur that they used to have in their glory days, but they still have the trappings of that, and they have their big mansions. And that would be, I'm sure, big time on Airbnb or the equivalent these days. But back then, tourists knew it was a great deal. You stay in a Maharaja's palace. Even a backpacker could afford it. And at first it was awkward because we were just scruffy kids, and we're in this palace, and there's 6 servants standing around while you're eating breakfast. And if there's a fly, they'll come and swat it. If you need more milk, they'll pour it. The rickshaw guy insisted on waiting for us out front in case we needed him. I don't like people, because for me, time is money. Don't waste your time. I'm not going to be going anywhere. I don't need you. Don't stay there. Go away. Shoo. No, I will stay here. If you get a moment to go somewhere, I'm with you. I want to take you on a ride. You can trust me. I'm here. Get away. I'm never going to see you again. Okay. And then 5 hours later, I step out. Hello, I'm here. And I get in, and he takes me for a ride, and he makes 50 cents. It was strange to get used to that, and this was a very good opportunity to firsthand experience this privilege that we have to be so wealthy on this planet. And I think it stays with me. And it's something I'm very clued into when I think of how much money we spend for certain niceties in south of the border where there's real need, how many, many times people could be helped with the same kind of investment. You're burdened with it. You're burdened with the humanity of this planet when you recognize relative privilege. And you're perplexed by traditions that you don't understand. There's a caste system. If your dad and mom were a beggar class, you're going to be a beggar class. And if you're a cute little kid and you grow up a cute little kid, you're never going to make any money as a beggar. So if your parents really love you, they will mutilate you. Yeah, so that when you grow up, you will be pathetic and get a lot of money on beggars' terms. And you will spend your life pushing that tin can with your head through the puddles with a colorful bird on your shoulder, and people will dance around you and throw coins into your bin. That's reality on this planet. And to go and experience that firsthand, it hits you, and it reminds you it's a complicated, fascinating world. And to be aware of the gap between rich and poor within our society and between our society and other societies. And to think of that power that we've got and the hopelessness that other societies might have. I'm so thankful that I've been out there and it's complicated my life to be tuned into that. I'm very, very concerned right now about the 10% of humanity that is in extreme poverty. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the seeds of that come from getting out of my comfortable world and traveling. Rickshaws, even going on a rickshaw is kind of perplexing because this guy's working so hard and you're going to give him 25 cents and you're complaining because 2 American hips can't fit on his chair. And that's our view. And then to add to the confusion, you go to a temple and it's decorated with fascinating art. Step into these temples, you don't find Madonnas and children. You find this eroticism. And it's all part of this Hindu culture. And it's intense. And when you're traveling, you need a break from that intensity. That's one thing we knew. Just for our own sanity, we needed to get out of everybody's staring at you, the zoo just escaped, and there's all of this stuff happening. It's a whirlwind. What are you going to do? Go to a movie, a theater. It's beautiful, Bollywood. It's cheap, it's air-conditioned, it's dark, nobody's staring at you. You're enjoying a very happy, light drama. It's so melodramatic, you don't even need to understand the Hindi. You can follow the plot. It's a beautiful way to spend an hour or two. We found different ways to just maintain our sanity as we were exploring the towns. We always had a hotel for refuge, and we invented a thing called fan baseball. You'd crumple up newspaper and make a tight little ball, and every room had a fan going like this around it. You'd both lay on your bed, and you'd lob the ball up there, and if the fan hit it onto that wall, it'd be a single. That wall would be a double, that one would be a triple, and if you could manage to make the wadded up baseball sit on that part in the middle that doesn't spin, that was a home run. So that was great relaxation for us when we were going exhausted without being in the streets. I really enjoyed also being on the trains. I love the train rides in India because it's just a constant parade of culture. It's a kaleidoscope of culture. And I would like to take we just went cattle car class, and we just went on little whistle stop trains that stopped at every little village. And every half an hour the train would stop for 10 minutes, and there'd be a whole parade. It's just a ritual. Every stop, everybody would come through. It would be beggars, cripples, singers, animals, you name it. I mean, it was just, I didn't want to be down in the middle of it because everybody would be staring at me and it'd be a commotion. But in India, the luggage racks are filled with people. Every 5 feet, there's a person. And I would scramble in there with the other people that were eyeballing that, and I'd climb up onto that. And then when the train went, the door was open, so you'd get a nice breeze. I could look out there and see the beautiful flooded monsoon farm field. And then at each stop, I could look down and see the parade. I just thought that was quite a nice way to travel across India. We went to Varanasi, the most holy city for the Hindus, where many people aspire to die. When you're about ready to wrap up your life and you're a devout Hindu, you go to Varanasi and you do your rituals on the ghats, the steps of the river Ganges. And the Ganges is the holy river. And the tourists do a very voyeuristic thing. You get up at the crack of dawn and you pay for a little tour and you get on a boat, and the boat goes down and you take pictures of people doing this very holy, having this holy moment. And people just ignore you, and it's kind of a thing. And we did that. And then as you're doing that, you know that people are waiting to die. They always know I guess you're going to come back a different way, and they want to die the right way, and you want to die and have your body burned and your ashes tossed into the Ganges River. So when you saw smoke coming over the bluff, you knew that's where the fires were. And we'd go up there, and you're not supposed to take a picture, but I thought, maybe I'll be giving a lecture in 40 years. I should have a shot of this. My takeaway there was, I love making a fire and just feeding it every so often. And you put a log on the fire, and a little while later, it crumples. It goes, and then you push it in further. And it goes, and you push it in further. And that's how my memory of how they were burning these bodies was. And it was just constant corpses being loaded into this fire, push. It was a powerful experience, and the streets of Varanasi were just amazing. Getting out of there, we're hitchhiking on big buses and getting an appreciation of the monsoon, and it was washing out streets. We didn't know we'd get to the next town, but it was a joyfulness because the monsoon was water and water was life. And India would be nothing without the monsoon. If you look at the map, I didn't see many lakes, but when I was traveling there during monsoon time, it was lakes everywhere. So it was like lakes come and go. We worked into Nepal through the back door up to Pokhara, and then we got into Kathmandu, and this was the end of the hippie rainbow. Kathmandu, Nepal, where Hindustan meets Buddha. And when you got to Kathmandu, it was another one of those hi-fi moments. You waited for this, you've earned this, you've come across all those borders, you're still standing, and it was worth it. Kathmandu, I would love to go back. It is just an amazing place. And like in India, English is the universal language, or the second language for travelers. Love the way they have with their language, Hotel Siddhartha, for homely. Please get here. You could do a whole book on these kind of little mistranslations. The hippies were gathering here. This was, the Mecca for the hippies. They would stay there until their visa expired, and then they'd have to go down to Goa, which apparently you could leave one zone and go to Goa, a little enclave on the coast of India, and you'd get your passport stamped, and then you'd get 90 more days. So people had that routine. You'd be in Nepal until you had to go to Goa, and that was a beach version of Kathmandu up in the Himalaya mountains. And this was marijuana city for any backpacker, and people were smoking pot. Everybody all around was smoking pot. I remember when the marijuana was sold in the marketplaces, and you think about this stress that people have on marijuana, but really it was more fundamental than marijuana. It was just freedom. It was just everything about this trip was freedom for people that lived predictable lives. I remember we went on a dugout canoe across the lake. We saw this herbal, I just describe it as an herbal essence waterfall. I don't even know if people know what that is, but I sure remember. Do you remember herbal essence waterfall? It made you want to wash your hair, And we wanted to hike through the jungle to get to this herbal essence, so we beached our canoe, and then we were walking through the jungle, and then I remember I was just in this dense jungle, and all of a sudden it occurred to us. Leeches. Countless leeches, little demonic black, head over tail, thirsty slinkies coming at us. You'd step back and they'd just keep on coming, wanting to suck your blood. And I don't know if it was really that scary, but I was so scared with all these leeches. And we were in the middle of this, and we hadn't even gotten up to our waterfall yet. And then when we got back to the hotel, we realized they got a little bit of our blood, but we made it to the waterfall. There was a classic tea house that everybody went to. It was called Pie and Chai. It was in a meadow. And I'd give anything for a photograph of it, because in my mind it is so idyllic. And they had this wonderful medieval brick oven, looked like a pizza oven. And coming out of that would be piping hot apple pies, the best apple pies I've ever had. And everybody was sitting around with their books and their marijuana and listening to the perfect American classic rock and roll, the Doors, the Stones, Creedence, and eating these apple pies. You're already high altitude with the Himalayas all around you, and you're just inspirational people everywhere you look. Poets, philosophers, people who are just passed out. And then above us were monkeys. eyeballing our glasses because they like glinty stuff. And I've always been really paranoid about monkeys because if you ever get bitten or scratched, you got to decide, are you going to get your rabies shots? And I wouldn't want to have to make that decision because I don't want to go interrupt the trip and get rabies and so on. So they were looking at me and I was nervous, so it was hard to be relaxed and in the moment with these monkeys. And my comfort food was a digestive biscuit. And it was always stressful to eat something when you're trying to stay healthy on the Hippie Trail. But you knew a pre-wrapped, digestive biscuits when you're in England. They're like in little packages, almost like a little snack on an airplane or something. And I loved these digestive biscuits. It was my sweet spot. I was just so comfort food. I just loved it. And the monkey wanted my digestive biscuit. And he came at me. And you reach a point where you just kind of go like that. And then he just sat right out of my reach and ate it in front of me. And then I realized he wanted my whole package. My package of digestives. And he got it. He got it. Oh. But walking around in Kathmandu, it was just endlessly entertaining. I mean, scenes like this. Oh, I could really just move in. And a lot of people did. I always thought this guy looks like an American that just decided to not shave or cut his hair. You don't know, he could be. There's a lot of people, they're no longer homesick. This is where they are. And what I love about it is every time you looked up, you'd see little kids. And they would go, I salute your virtues. Namaste. 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 And that was the Hippie Trail. So we started in Istanbul. We took the bus all the way to Tehran. Took 3 or 4 days instead of 2. Went across Iran, got to that godforsaken border between Iran and Afghanistan. 2 major cities in Afghanistan, Herat in the west, Kabul in the east. Over Khyber Pass across Pakistan, north for a vacation from the trip in Srinagar, and then down to Delhi, all the famous stuff in India, and then to the finale in Kathmandu. All right, well, that was the trip. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so here's the deal. There's another about 30 or 40 minutes, and it's kind of going to be taking it from on the road to the impact on my teaching and philosophically, where did all this go? In other words, so what? That'll be the last bit. I hope you can stay. It's the impactful thing. At the very end, if you want to get an autograph, I'm so thankful you got the book. I'd love to autograph it. I got my Sharpie. I'm just going to explain right now how it works, and it's kind of a fun way to do it. We'll be downstairs in a big wide spot in the lobby, straight down there. And I just do not like a nice, polite English line. What I would like is a chaotic Italian mosh pit, okay? So if you want to get an autograph, I've spent a lot of time in autographs from some great writers, and it takes a long time. And what I would rather do is make it really quick. So you gather around me. I'm just going to go right into the middle of the pile of people, hold out whatever you want autographed, and I just do this until there's nobody left. It works out really great. I'm not going to personalize. I'll certainly sign it. And you can take all the photos you want, but don't ask me to pose, because if I pose for you, I got to pose for everybody, and we'll be here all night, okay? So that's how that's going to work down there. I'm so thankful that we've got Elliott Bay Book Company, and it's great to support your local book company. Let's hear it for Elliott Bay. And as you came in, so I don't have to spend a lot of time advertising how I make all my money and have a good time with my 100 colleagues at Rick Steves Europe and Edmonds. You picked up that newsletter. It's a 64-page collection of my favorite experiences in Europe, because experiences is what distinguishes a good trip, and it's hopefully that you read that and it'll inspire you to have experiences like that. And it also explains all the things we do in our business with our TV shows, our luggage, our books, and our tours. Every year we take 30,000 people around on our tours, and all the information is in there. It's not a formal break, but let's just take a 3 or 4 minute stretch and talk about your next Hippie Trail trip, and then we will have a few Q&As, and then I'll take you on for the finale, okay? Thank you very much. See you in 3 minutes. Really difficult. and turned that little hall right on 4th Avenue, across the street from where I work to this day, into a lecture hall and started teaching people how to travel. And the fall after I got home, sort of as a revenge from that guy who taught the lousy class in the experimental college, I started my own class at the experimental college called European Travel Cheap, and it was good. You know, I was going to be very diligent to collect the experiences I had so people could learn from my experience rather their own and travel better. And it was all about experiences, just like in the newsletter you got. I mean, look at, I made whales come to life, and if you can read it there in the little bubble by whales, it says, "Feel my fjords, caress my castles." Okay? So we were going to have a good time in Europe in 1978. And I spent, ever since then, 3 months a year in Europe, making mistakes, taking careful notes. When I get ripped off, I celebrate. They don't know who they just ripped off. I'm going to learn that scam and pack it into my material and help people travel better. And it was budget travel. It was hardcore budget travel. It was finding places that were undiscovered that I could proceed to ruin by sending everybody there. And I found some great places. And I decided I don't want to keep those places secret. I want to put them in a book. So I self-published my first Europe Through the Back Door 2 years after I wrote the journal that you've got. And it was the easy book to write. I just gave the lecture to the paper, and I collected my 20 for all the skills. And the last half of the book were individual chapters on my 20 favorite discoveries. I was employing the same skills I learned on the Hippie Trail to find that experiential Europe. It's interesting how you learn skills on the road and they work for on the road anywhere. You can meet people if you're creative. You can get out of your comfort zone and eat things you'll never forget. And you can find breathtaking moments. If you've ever taken a class from me, I've probably mentioned it's so great to be on the top of the Alps in Switzerland, walking on a ridge, like almost tight-roping. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eiger Monk and Jungfrau, and ahead of you, you hear the long legato tones of an Alp horn, announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open. It's just around the corner, and the coffee schnapps is on. I've said that a few times. And I just love the fact that I could find that place when I was a kid, and I could go back just a couple years ago, and that same ridge is there. I'm older, but I'm still young at heart, and I'm still able to get on that ridge, and I can still hear the long legato tones of the Alp horn.
Jawohl.
Oh yeah, announcing that the coffee schnapps is on, and it's just around the corner. So that's what inspires me to keep on teaching this stuff. Europe Through the Back Door is out in its 40th edition now, as it's evolved over time. My business is based on TV shows, guidebooks, and tours. The only thing that makes any serious money is the tours. And in my very first classes, when I didn't have much to sell, I would take minibuses around Europe, and I would be the driver and the guide. And in my class, a lot of times my classes were just free, I would have the handbook for the tour on the stage. We'd take a break. I always was so thankful. I completely trusted people in my classes. I would never check ID for checks or anything like that. And I had the handbook laying around here. I thought people would thumb through it, like what they saw, and take the tour. Time and time again, they thumbed through it, they liked what they saw, and they stole the handbook. I thought, this little book is driving decent people to theft. It needs to be available for purchase. I would have stole it just because I need that information. Remember the importance of information. So the next year I decided to put everything I know about the tour into the book, produce a little staple-bound $3.50 book that was the handbook for our tours, but also designed so you could do our tours on your own. That was the spirit of this. My friends were saying, you're crazy. You're telling everybody everything about the tour. You're going to gut that business. But I said, no way. There's so many people want to go to Europe, and it'll be wonderful. And to this day, the guidebooks are the handbooks for the tours. Back then, it was Europe on $5 a day. That was the main book. Remember Arthur Fromer? Taking Care of Your Money. My book was Europe in 22 days, taking care of your time, cutting through all the superlatives, saying, yes, I know you can spend all lifetime in Florence, but I've got 1.5 days. I'm an American with the shortest vacations in the rich world. How am I going to use that time smartly? See, that's the thing. So that's what I do with with my teaching is use people's time smartly as well as their money, and those books evolved. Eventually the publisher said, let's loosen it up a bit, 2 to 22 days, but you still have the spirit of helping people plan a smart trip. We even had a deal where we would announce when I would be going around and inviting people to what we call draft behind our tours. You could just be 24 hours behind us and all the hotels would be empty as we checked out. And it worked really well for people. They just had the book. And we then branched out and did other countries, and it was 22 days this, 22 days that, tours and guidebooks. And to this day, in my business plan, it's got to have a TV show, it's got to have a guidebook, and it's got to have a tour. Nothing can manage on their own. Everything subsidizes everything else. It contributes to everything. If you take one of those dimensions away, it falls down. But if it's all together and working well, it's a better value than it should be. It's more profitable than it should be. It's just a beautiful sort of system. And we have a lot of fun with that. Now we have 40 itineraries, and as I mentioned, we take 30,000 people around Europe on 1,200 tours every year. But we have that very, very feisty insistence on nimbleness. We fit 24 people on a bus and expect to be as nimble as 5 people in a station wagon. And we are. And to me, the real trick is, if you want to understand how you make money as a tour company, you talk 24 people into sharing one vehicle. I rent a 50-seat bus. I have 24 paying customers. And think about how much they would spend if they each rented a car or took a train ticket. It's much cheaper for 24 people to share one vehicle with the driver. And I get to keep all that extra money. And then if all of the hotels and restaurants and entertainment and sightseeing is a wash, their trip costs about the same whether they rent a car or go on my tour bus. If I can advertise it in a way that attracts fun people, shape the clientele, which we do very aggressively, it can actually be a blessing to have 24 people on the bus, and that's, for some people, a great opportunity. But we're very careful to shape the clientele. And we know that for some people it's a great experience, and for the wrong people on a Rick Steves tour bus, it is a hellish disappointment, okay? So you gotta understand when it comes to a tour what you're buying into. And now I've got 150 wonderful guides in Europe that do the tours in a way that I'm quite proud of. When we started making TV shows, of course, that's when more people knew what we do. And that's been a real fun way, part of our outreach. Just in 2 weeks, I'm going over with the TV crew to Rome and Istanbul and make some new shows. Enjoying doing that. Back when I was giving the all-day skills class on Saturday in the experimental college, I realized a lot of people were driving in from far away to get that. I thought, why don't you spend the night and I'll spend all day Sunday teaching art. So I had a 6-hour art class on Sunday back then, and for decades, literally, I wanted to turn it into a 6-hour mini-series on TV. And with COVID, we finally had a time to do that. And it was the biggest project we've ever done. It's 6 hours, 90-page script, really a complicated script to write, but just such an exciting time. Gene, my buddy on the Hippie Trail, is my co-author on that, and we produced that art series. Gene still works with me. There's Gene, and very talented guy. He's a musician, he's an author. He's written a book called Michelangelo at Middle Age, and he's my collaborator whenever I do a book that is really demanding with history and art and so on. Gene is the guy who produces all of our audio tours. If you've got that app that has 65 free walks around Europe, Gene spearheaded that from the start, and it's been a lot of fun for a lot of people. So when we're traveling, we got this whole notion of, you've been to the Hippie Trail, you're going to come back and now you're going to teach European travel. Are you going to be like a guru or something like that? No, but it has an impact on you, and you look at travel that can be transformational. In the tourism industry, they throw around that word transformational a lot, and I take it seriously. I want travel to be transformational. If somebody's going to travel all the way over there and come back, they should be different. They should be better for it. And I like the idea that you can be a tourist, you can be a traveler, or you can be a pilgrim. And I shouldn't say, or you can be and you can be a pilgrim. Nobody should be just a tourist, and nobody should be just a pilgrim in general, but you can mix it all together. For a tourist, the road is a playground. For a traveler, the road is school. And for a pilgrim, the road is church or mosque or synagogue. And it's just a great opportunity to be your own mixer and decide what kind of a mix you want out of that. But I don't think a lot of people give themselves the opportunity to be poetic and philosophical and spiritual in their travels. It's nice to be that at home, but try being that far away from home. It really makes the experience richer. So I got pretty highfalutin in my writing. I have this Maslow's hierarchy of travel needs that I think about. The bottom rung is the skills. That's my Europe Through the Back Door book, and I used to teach that class for a long time. And then I slid up Maslow's hierarchy, and I wanted to teach appreciation of history, art, culture, and wine, and cuisine, and all that. And then the pinnacle of that Maslow's hierarchy of travel needs is traveling in a way where you broaden your perspective, and you become more friendly with the world. And that's really the essence of this whole travel as a political act stuff I've been doing. And now when I go around the country and give my talks, this is the talk I generally give, is travel as a political act. And that really goes way back to, I think, maybe the most powerful eureka I ever had in my travels, when it was very, very fundamental on my first trip, when I was 14 years old, visiting relatives in Norway with my mom and dad after seeing the piano factories in Germany. My dad imported pianos. He was a piano tuner here, and then he started imported pianos. Had he not done that, I would have never gone to Europe. But I was in the Palace Gardens, the park behind the Oslo Palace, Frogner Park. And I remember, with my 14-year-old egocentric outlook, that my parents were just loving the heck out of me. It was a big compromise for them. They didn't have much money to go to Europe, and it cost them a lot, and they only accomplished half of what they could have accomplished without me, but they wanted to take me along. They were loving me so much. And I looked out over that park, and I saw it was speckled with other parents loving their kids as much as my parents loved me. And it just hit me like an explosion. This world is home to equally precious little children of God. And I thought, that's the beauty of traveling. And I've thought about that a lot. And if you believe in a God, then logically we're all children of that God. And if that's the case, we're all brothers and sisters, and when you travel, you get to know the family. And any religion has this lovely idea of love your neighbor. And if you do believe in a God, then logically there's nothing in common with proximity and love your neighbor. I don't care what J.D. Vance was talking about when he said you love the people nearest you the most, and then you help other people. No, love thy neighbor is the same across the sea or across the street. Need, suffering, joy, love, it's just as good on the other side of the planet as it is right here.
Amen.
When you get that big idea. So unfortunately, that's kind of a radical concept when we talk about America's imprint on the world and the impact we have with this whole USAID discussion going on right now. But in my experience, when you travel in order to connect. You want to get your fingers dirty in the local culture. You want to gain an appreciation that we have the American dream, other people have a different dream. This is a very fundamental thing. These Sri Lankans do not have the American dream. My Bulgarian friends don't have the American dream. They got the Bulgarian dream. My Norwegian relatives have the Norwegian dream. And people have their own baggage, and people have their own challenges and struggles. And that's one thing I learned in India. When I was in India, I would just get into the Indian news. I'm a news junkie, and I just wanted to read. They have their knockoff Time and Newsweek magazines, and it's in English. This is on a later trip. But I just thought it's healthy for me for one trip to not be in touch with America's news and be India's news. And I just made a point to get really into it, and it was fascinating. And it was remarkable to me because it had nothing to do with the United States. It was their world. And it seems kind of obvious, but a lot of Americans don't realize that. Americans think it's us and then other people that relate to us, but there's lots going on out there that does not relate to us. And when you travel, you're aware that, yes, we have 9/11 and that's our baggage. All of our lives are, for 25 years now, we lost 2,800 people, and that shapes our worldview. And we are today where we are, I think to a certain degree because of 9/11. Other people have their own 9/11s. It's hard for us to imagine. Most countries have something much worse than 9/11, and we should at least give them a little wiggle room for their baggage, as we'd like to have a little wiggle room because of our baggage. Every country has its own Nathan Hales, Patrick Henrys, and Ethan Allens. All of them great patriots that wish they had more than one life to give for their country. And there's nothing wrong about accepting that. Our Nathan Hales are cool, so are theirs. And I just really like to, as a tour guide, to take all of these ethnocentric emotions on the road and remind us. In fact, that's why I do my symphonic journey all around the United States. It's a chance to take our musical emotions overseas. We love John Philip Sousa and Aaron Copland and the Star Spangled Banner. You go to Norway and they love Edvard Grieg, and you go to Vienna and they love Strauss, and you go to Italy and they love Verdi, and you go to Germany and they love Wagner. You go to Czech Republic and they love Smetana. It's a beautiful thing. And it is that beauty of travel to recognize that different people have the same passions, but in a different cultural realm. I love this idea that we should know our enemies. And if you look at my Travel as a Political Act book, it's my most impactful travel experiences of a lifetime of exploring the world. And half of that book is written from experiences when I went to places my government did not want me to go. Cuba, Nicaragua back in the day, Palestine, Iran. These are great places to travel. Lonely Planet sells a lot of guidebooks to Iran and Cuba and places like that. Americans don't even think anybody goes there. No, a lot of people go there. They're not Americans because we don't think we're supposed to go there. But the rest of the world doesn't have that hang up. Cuba is the #1 Caribbean resort for Canadians and Germans, and Americans don't think it's an option. Anytime my government says I can't go somewhere, I want to go there.
What about North Korea?
I don't want to go there. But I was thinking as you blurted out that, why am I so interested in legalizing marijuana? High is a place for me. And I don't want to go there a lot, but sometimes I want to go there. And as a matter of principle, if my government says I can't go there, there better be a good reason. And there are good reasons for me not going to certain places, but there's no good reason for a responsible adult to not be able to go every once in a while to that place called high. So it's that philosophy of getting out of your comfort zone, seeing things with a different perspective, and it is certainly yours when you go to these kind of places, to know your enemy. Do we have an image of Palestinian people like this? I don't think so. There's 6 million Palestinians. 2 of them are homeless, 2 million of them are homeless now, but there's 4 million that are on the verge of homelessness because of what's going on in the West Bank. I had a wonderful time traveling there. Why can't we travel to Palestine? It's so important to get out. Iran, you don't want to go there now, but there's plenty of times when you can go to Iran. I wanted to go to Iran with our TV crew because we had just bombed Baghdad, and I wanted to film Tehran while it was still in one piece, to be honest. And also, I just think it's good style to know people before you bomb them. You got to kill innocent people if you're a big power like ours. Bombs fall, bullets fly. But I'm a taxpayer, and every bomb that drops and every bullet that flies has my name on it. That's just an honest thing. And I need to take a little responsibility for it. And I wanted to know what's our big hang-up with Iran. I wanted to go and find out how 70 million people could vote for a theological dictatorship run by the Ayatollah, because it's confusing to me. So we went there, and I thank God for public television because I could make a TV show and bring it home and share what I learned with the Americans. Man, oh man, nobody would touch that with a 10-foot pole in commercial television news because you got to play up to the needs of advertisers. Public television. It's the one place on the dial where you can assume an attention span, respect people's intelligence, and make programming driven not by a passion for keeping advertisers happy, but simply by a passion for inspiring and equipping people to get out there and get to know the world. The 800 number is right here. Or you can go online. Sustaining membership is preferred, monthly. Going to Iran, oh, baby. My daughter was this old when I went there. And I looked at those girls, and they're just as spirited and fun-loving and joyful as my girl's friends on her birthday. I'll never get over that. I was so close to my daughter's beautiful circle of friends in school, and I went to Iran and I thought, yeah, these girls deserve a life as joyful as can be. And we're on that parallel evolutionary track. And these girls were old enough to be demonstrating in the streets to not wear their scarves in the last year as that terrible challenge is being worked out in Iran. We can help the world. We could help grease the skids for this. And we're not. And you could do it because you love your neighbor. You could do it because you've got a strong faith and you believe in God. Or you can do it just because you want to be safe and live in a stable world. It doesn't matter. I'm so excited about this opportunity that we can love our neighbors. But if I'm going to try to promote the notion of the value of, compassion overseas, I know that in the privacy of a voting booth, the typical American, even with a big cross hanging right here, votes not for love your neighbor, but votes for what's good for me in the short term and my family. Okay, frame it that way. The world would be a better place. It'd be a more stable place if it had less desperation. Everybody loves their gelato. That's the common denominator. There are walls. There are walls all over this planet. And I'm fascinated by walls. And the traveler knows that you have to have a dual narrative approach to walls. You don't know what a wall is if you haven't talked to people on both sides of that wall. By the nature of media in our country, we don't get much of both sides of the wall when we talk about the Holy Land. It's important for us to reach out to get that dual narrative, and then we have a better ability to assess it. Physical walls or metaphorical walls, you've got to know people on both sides. In the case of Israel and Palestine, Israel had to build this wall to protect itself from violent incursions by terrorists or freedom fighters or whatever you want to call it, depending on who you are. Okay, I can buy that. They needed that wall. But the unfortunate consequence, unintended, of that wall now is it keeps the younger generations not able to talk to each other and saddled by their parents' baggage. And for that reason, I don't see much hope until the younger people can get together. How did the Irish people overcome their wall? Today, the wall in Belfast is a tourist attraction. That's all, it's a tourist attraction. Because both communities work together to give their kids a chance to go on field trips together and dance together and create together. And they learned not to be afraid and distrustful of each other. It's brilliant. And Ireland is reaping the rewards of that now. We have a metaphorical wall in our country. And I know that Seattle's got its bubble. And I'm just wishing that I could get out and talk to people and they could meet me and I could meet them. The cool thing about when you meet people that might be your enemies or people on the other side of the wall, when you go over there and meet them, it makes it tougher for their propaganda to demonize us. And when they talk to us and we go home, it makes it tougher for our propaganda to demonize them. I've always said that in terms of angry, war-torn places. I was just saying that in terms of the United States of America right now. It's the same thing. We all have our own media. We all believe our own media. We don't understand the people who go on the other media. But if we trespassed over there and got to know them a little bit and vice versa, it might be helpful. You got walls or you got bridges? Walls or bridges? The irony is the most frightened people want walls. And the fact is walls make you less safe in the long term. You need bridges. Walls will never do it. We're 4% of the planet. You can't build walls high enough to protect us from all the stuff that's coming down on us, whether it's inundations of millions of people because of climate change, climate refugees, whether it's the next pandemic, whether it's who knows what. You need bridges. You need good governance. You need well-educated societies. You need an appreciation of the fragility and the beauty of nature. And you need a willingness to work with other nations in a constructive way. It saddens me that we're pulling out of the world when the world needs us more than ever. And these bridges just inspire me. I love the bridges. I love Europe. And you know, when you think about Europe, the European Union, and you have to have currencies, how are you going to make a paper money for 20 different countries? Whose president are you going to put on it? Whose national bird are you going to put on it? What they do? Bridges. The European currency has beautiful, iconic bridges to work together. I was just researching in Oslo, my new Scandinavia edition. My favorite news site in Oslo is a simple little one. It's called the Smiling Bench in front of the Nobel Peace Center, where they award the Nobel Peace Prize. And the cool thing about this bridge, right there on the harbor, you cannot sit on that bridge without coming together with whatever stranger is also on that bench. The Smiling Bench. Wow. And etched in the pavement right in front of it is a quote by Nelson Mandela. It says, "The most powerful weapon is talking to each other." Just love that. I've spent a lot of time, I've already been alluding to it, with this economic justice. And I just want to kind of finish things up with a review of the economic reality in our planet. And I got to say, it's kind of because of the whole USAID thing. Half of humanity, 4 billion people, are trying to live on $5 a day. That's just a fact, and that's okay. That's sustainable. If you have stability in a reasonable government, you can have electricity, water, healthcare, food, education on $5 a day. 10% of humanity is trying to live on $2 a day. That's what the United Nations calls extreme poverty. That's not okay. That's a prescription for broken states, violence, extremism, a lot of frustration and anger. $2 a day. We were on a trajectory to defeat hunger, to wipe out that extreme poverty number. We cut it in half in one generation until about 15 years ago when things started to tick up again. Why did it tick up? Climate change, COVID, conflict, and now ticking up. It's amazing one person can do this, but the United States is so important. And if one person can cut out American leadership and doing our share with USAID, supporting the United Nations World Food Program, that's going to really cause extreme poverty to go up. This is our challenge, to recognize the humanity of the fact, especially for people that are interested in women's causes, that the average lot in life for women on this planet is to abandon their children and walk for water and to walk for firewood every morning, to spend half their waking hours walking for water and firewood. And it gets more difficult every year. This woman is not as old as she looks. When a woman has to leave her children, it's heartbreaking. And those kids become then susceptible to very dangerous and violent sort of factions and education. Women want to stay home with their kids. A little bit of help from the United Nations provides guidance for good nutrition, so mothers know that it is vital that kids get the proper nutrition in the first 1,000 days so they won't be stunted. If you don't get good nutrition in the first 1,000 days, including 9 months of prenatal, you'll be stunted and you'll never be able to function properly. But if you get that, and it's not that tough, you can have a child that can grow up and contribute and be fulfilled. That's the goal of the United Nations. I don't know what Elon Musk sees in the criminal organization of trying to do this on a mass scale, but it makes our world a much safer place and a much more just place. And if you recognize the scary gap between rich and poor in our country, and when you don't have a good middle class, the trajectory we're on, what might happen, if you don't understand the risk, go south of the border to a place like Guatemala City. And every pharmacy, every bank, and every hotel has an armed guard in front of it. And in a middle-class neighborhood, you pool your resources so you can pay for a guard so the kids can get to the park safely. I've learned that even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's not a nice place to raise your kids. How can these oligarchs so aggressively try to make more money when they have long since got to the point where their incremental consumption of wealth does not make them any happier? It tails off. If you're poor, you need every $1,000 and you're steep on the curve of returns. But then for all of us, it gets a little flatter, and for many of us, it's already flat. and you keep working and you make more money. What are you going to do with that? Find a clever way to consume it and not be happier? Or are you going to work on what I like to call vicarious consumption, get joy out of helping other people who really need it consume it? That's the challenge for an enlightened, successful person in capitalism, I would say. Now, even if you are rich and powerful enough to barricade yourself behind designer fortifications like these people in Latin America, it's not a nice place. It's just not a nice place. And I see these kind of guarded mansions in the South, in the global South, as kind of emblematic or examples, metaphors of what we are as a country, as we want to build walls also around a lot of people that are very, very needy. I'm just concerned about how do we buy safety with our defense? We spend $800 billion a year on hard power, and we're now zeroing out 1% of our budget of soft power. That soft power, even the stingy 1%, comes with strings attached. It has to be done in ways that makes us stronger. It doesn't just go for who needs it. It's already couched in what makes America stronger, so it's got strings attached. But my concern is, maybe if you spent $5 billion less out of the $800 billion in hard power and you invested it in soft power, it might actually make you safer. I'm not talking love your neighbor, because that doesn't work. I'm talking what people really care about: security, stability, their own personal economic wealth. If you could move some of that hard power into soft power, our country would be stronger. Here's an example. For one armored vehicle, $1 million, you could drill 100 wells in 100 thirsty communities, and all the mothers in those communities could stay home and nurture their kids rather than abandoning them to walk for water every day. And every morning, instead of walking across the county, when all those moms in all those villages, 100 villages, for the cost of one vehicle, when they walk across the square and they pump their water, what are they going to think when they pump that water? God bless America. God bless America. I've got water for my kids. I don't have to walk for 3 hours for it. I'm not saying love your neighbor. I'm saying a practical investment in goodwill. So America could be beloved. America, if you want to make America great, that's the way you make America great. We don't know how much people admire America. I know how much people admire America. America is needed in the family of nations. America, the ideals of America. I'm not talking about the policies of one president or another. That comes and goes. It is the ideals of what America stands for. That's what is beloved about our country. And right now we have very little to do with our ideals, but they are still shining and inspiring on the hill. And here's an example. I could give a whole class of these kind of examples. I got friends in Europe who were born in the 1940s named Johnny and Frankie. Why were they named Johnny and Frankie in France or Switzerland in the 1940s?
Dad were American soldiers.
Exactly. They were inspired by American soldiers. They named their kids after the soldiers that came through their towns. I was filming in a little mom and pop chateau in Burgundy a few years ago, and it was late in the day. The sun was going down. I was stressed out. I needed to get up on the rooftop and get a wide shot. We came in. And I said, hi, yes. We knew him because we take our groups there. And yes, thank you. I love a glass of wine, but we need to get up on the roof first and get a nice, pretty shot of the roof. No, but you must have some wine. No, I'll have it after we get the, okay, wine, okay. So we sit down and we have our glass of wine and our cheese and our crackers. And then the children of the chateau, of the family, of this noble family, bring out this precious, like a religious relic, 48-star American flag. And they unfurled it in front of us. And they said, this is the flag we raised over our village on that great day in 1945 when we were liberated from Nazi tyranny by American troops. And we will never let anybody into our chateau, any American into our chateau, without bringing out our flag and thanking those Americans for the valor and the ideals and the strength of America. And they said, we would like you to go home and tell your friends that we will forever be thankful for that America. And this haunts me because right now what we're doing, we're monetizing everything. We're turning our back on allies. We're embracing dictators. Why? And we're pulling away from the world. The world has seen that for 4 years with the first Trump period, and things didn't happen without America at the table. In order to grapple with these global existential challenges that are coming at us in the future, we need America at the table with the other 96% of humanity. If we're at the table, humanity will come with us. If we're not at the table, humanity will get sidetracked in all these other, and we're going to join those other axis of evil kind of forces right now. In the name of Make America Great, that is so upside down. And I love my country as much as anybody. And it just breaks my heart what's going on. And I love the world too, because I've traveled a lot. And I love the future because I've got a new grandson. And this grandson is named Atlas. Is that a good name or what? Now, you would think that I have a grandson, I'd get real and I'd be closer to home with my concerns. But when you're a traveler, you love your grandson, you're so thankful your daughter is so happy and her husband, and it's just so great. And it could be great for a lot of parents and a lot of children, people I don't even know. And I'm aware of that. I don't know, it might be my faith, it might be my travels, it might just be I'm softy, but the stakes are high, the humanity is vivid. And when you travel, oh baby, you're burdened with this beauty. And then you think, wow, can I do this? Is it safe? What about fear? There's a lot of fear in our society right now. When I did the Hippie Trail, people said bon voyage. When was the last time anybody said bon voyage to you? What do they say now? Have a safe trip. We'll pray for you. Are you sure you want to go over there considering all that's happening? When somebody tells me have a safe trip, I'm inclined to say, well, you have a safe stay at home. Because where I'm going statistically, and I know statistics are optional these days, but where I'm going statistically is safer than where you're staying. In fact, if you knew the statistics and if you loved your kids, you would take them to Europe tomorrow. This is how I sell tours. Think about the most frightened people in this country. Who are they? People buried deep in the middle, metaphorically, of this great nation of ours, without passports, whose worldview is shaped not by personal experience, but by fear-mongering commercial TV news. Who is the base of Trump? It's these people who are so afraid of the rest of the world. Fear is for people who don't get out very much. The flip side of fear is understanding, and we gain understanding when we travel. It empowers us. And there's a lot of powerful forces right now in our society that would find it really profitable and really convenient if we were just dumbed down and afraid. Why are they so intent on Xing out legacy media? That's the new thing, legacy media. They're just setting it up. It's teeing it up to zero that out so that media, the fourth pillar of our democracy, will be the alternative, social media. They can buy it, they can own it, they can shape it, and then we can be afraid and we can be manipulated. It is fascinating. If you wonder what's going on, there's a guy, a travel writer named Rick Steves, made a TV show called Lessons from European Fascism. Watch that show. I worked very hard on this show. Half of Europe was fascist 100 years ago. And all those dictators read the same playbook. Hitler was elected. It took him a couple months to become the dictator he wanted to be. And he set about doing exactly what a guy we all know is doing right now. Exactly. It's a little doing to replace the leadership of the military, but if you don't do that, you're not going to get what you need. That's next. Wow. Get to know the people. Get out there in the world. Have fun. It's your playground. Go on a bus where the girls stare at you for 2 hours. Afghanistan, 1978. She must be 55 years old now. The Hippie Trail is not from Istanbul to Kathmandu. It's an opportunity for us to get out of there, do that Hajj to Mecca, bike across the deep south, talk to people on the other side of the wall. My last little tour guide moment, and then we'll be out of here, is a favorite tool of mine for teaching Americans a little bit about how not to be so afraid about freaky, scary stuff on this planet. It's a whirling dervish. I'm a tour guide in Turkey. For a lot of people, that's cruise ship entertainment on a Mediterranean vacation. But it's a monk who's whirling, and I wanted my group to meet it. So I'm just going to paraphrase my experience. My group's at the hotel. I'm running around the town. I find a dervish. I say, "Hi, I'm an American tour guide. I've got 20 tourists in the hotel. Can we watch you whirl?" And he says, "I'm not a photo op. I'm a monk. But if I can explain to you how I pray, I will let you watch." I say, "Great. When and where?" "My rooftop, sundown. I'll be there." I go back to the hotel, bring my group over. We assemble. He comes out dressed up in his monk's outfit, and he says, "Merhaba. I am a dervish. I think you Christians would call me a monk. My prophet is Mevlana. I think you call him Rumi. He's the prophet of love, kind of like your St. Francis. Everybody can get their brains around that. 5 times a day I meditate. I whirl myself into a meditative trance, contemplating the teachings of my prophet Mevlana. And I think about how can I be a conduit of God's love. I plant one foot in my home, my family, my community. The other foot goes around and around, celebrating the diversity in God's great creation far and wide. One arm goes up to accept the love of our Heavenly Father, and the other hand, like the spout on a tea kettle, showers down God's love. And he whirls and he meditates and he loses himself in that beautiful trance, thinking about the teaching of Rumi. His head tilts over, his robe bibbles out. And as the tour guide, I get to look at that and then look over at my group and see the wonder sweep over their face. And I just think, this is what travel is all about. We're going to go home, and God willing, we will take this new understanding, this broader perspective, and we will implement that as citizens of this great and powerful country of ours. And in doing that, we'll make our world a better place and our lives more full and rewarding. Thank you very much, and happy travels. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.